The 2024 NFL Draft is this week, and the quarterback class is absolutely loaded. I'm Jake with Sports Around the Bar, and today we are going to go through the top 11 guys that we see at the most important position in the NFL that are worthy of draft picks in this year's upcoming draft. So, if you're ready, grab a drink. Let's get right into it. Starting at number 1, we have Caleb Williams, the USC quarterback. That is, in my opinion, one of the blue chip players in this class, an obvious slam dunk home run player when it comes to on-the-field production at USC. What can't be said about him that you haven't heard already? He's fantastic moving around in the pocket. He does a great job extending plays and making things happen. Loves to throw the home run ball and is pretty good at doing it. There are some negatives. He's not the perfect prospect. There's been a lot of times that he'll sit there and turn his nose up at some easier completions just because the home run play is available, and sometimes that gets him into trouble. Sometimes it gets him throwing some passes that he shouldn't. But I wonder how much of that comes from USC's offensive line being as bad as it was. I mean, if you look at all the games that they lost, most of those games, not only were they having to put up a bunch of points, but it was because the offensive line was falling down on them when they played good defenses that really kind of put USC behind the ball. So with Williams, if he goes to the Bears at number 1, like everyone kind of expects to happen this year, I think he can look forward to a better situation at offensive line than what he experienced at USC. I mean, the Bears' offensive line may not be a killer group. They may not be like the Eagles or the Cowboys of the past here for the past couple of years, but they are a group that is coming together, that has some talent on there, and should do a better job play-by-play of keeping some pressure out of his face. That paired with their receivers should make him one of the better quarterbacks, more likely to succeed because the situation is so much better. So Williams is our number 1 here. I do think there is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about, strangely enough, and we don't like to get into a lot of politics or anything like that, but the off-the-field things for Caleb Williams. When you've got pictures of him showing up to things, with a pink cell phone case, when you got him taking pictures in a dress for GQ and all the rest of it, and painting his fingernails, calling out, saying F the other team that we're playing with Utah, you have to admit there's a distraction level to that. So if that weighs into the decision, should the Chicago Bears consider going another direction, or should one of the other teams consider not drafting Williams if he falls to them? I think it's a personal thing. I mean, that's the biggest issue with evaluating a prospect like this, where you don't get to talk to the guy, you don't get to actually get a feel for who he is as a person. That is a very serious concern that I think NFL teams are going to have to ask themselves and look at in terms of evaluating him. Yes, what he does on the field looks special, but if we're struggling and we're 5-11 and he's creating all kinds of drama and everything in the media, what does that do to our locker room? What does that do for signing free agents in the offseason? I think there is a very serious concern that for whatever reason, people don't want to talk about that with Williams. It exists. Do I think it's going to have any effect on it? No, because I think Chicago's already locked in. We would have heard some rumblings if Chicago was going to go in a different direction. I think that pick is already, the card might as well be sitting in Roger Goodell's hands right now. But it is something to watch for going forward is, if you're winning, a lot of those things can be forgiven. A lot of those things don't matter when you want to call out the other team that you're playing against and you want to be going off the rails and doing all kinds of controversial stuff. It doesn't matter when you're winning. But when you're losing, all of that gets dialed up to the nth degree. And ask Johnny Manziel how well that turned out for him. Now, he had other things going on with him. I'm not saying Johnny Manziel is the same caliber quarterback prospect that Williams is, but those things are negative. Baker Mayfield went through a lot of that in Cleveland. Joe Burrow, I think you could argue, does some of the same things where there's a little bit of taunting. There's a little bit of that edge to his play that because the Bengals have been very successful with Joe Burrow, a lot of that swept under the rug. A lot of people say, hey, I like that kind of competitive fire and all the rest of it. But when Mayfield does it in Cleveland, you're like, oh, he's immature and all the rest of it. So it'll be something to watch. And I think it's a really interesting part of this discussion when it comes to Williams. And it's just strange that we haven't seen more from it. Now, at number 2, I think it is close between these two players. I think that Williams is still the better prospect, but we have Drake May as our number 2 quarterback. And I mean, it seems like there's been a hit campaign on him throughout the draft process where everybody's talking about all the things he doesn't do well, and we're kind of ignoring all the things that he does well. I mean, he looks like a special athlete. He looks like he has a special arm. His accuracy is, well above average for a quarterback prospect. I think he has some issues. I think his footwork isn't perfect. I think some of his decision-making, again, he plays hero ball sometimes and takes some shots down the field when you could be throwing the ball away or we could be looking for a dump-off pass. So that is an element to his game, but I think it's a little more forgivable when you're talking about the players that he's playing with at UNC, where they just didn't have the world beaters. They didn't have top-level talent that almost every other quarterback in this list has been playing with. So when you factor that in and look at the actual depth of talent that May has been able to get the most out of, in my opinion, over the past couple of years, he should be considered every bit as an elite of a prospect as Caleb Williams. Maybe slightly below that when you just compare on the field performance. But I think when you're talking about Drake May, there's no reason he shouldn't be your number 2 quarterback. He has been honestly dragged over the past couple of weeks for things that I think are really small. I mean, he misses a couple throws once in a while. I think he's got some footwork issues that kind of mess up his throwing a little bit, but that's all easily coachable stuff and things that, as long as you have a prospect that's willing and able to learn, a lot of that will probably be smoothed out in the long run. So I expect these guys to still go 1-2. I think all of this has just been smoke from teams that maybe want a guy like May to follow them. I still think you have Caleb Williams at 1, Drake May at 2, and then we're talking about the first real decision at number 3. Now, my number 3 is where things start to get a little spicy because I have Bo Nix, the Oregon quarterback, which the consensus, pretty much everything I've seen has had Bo Nix as a second-round pick from everybody, and I just don't understand it. I mean, when you talk about the way he protects the football, the size, the arm strength, the way he scrambles in the pocket, Bo Nix has a lot of that high-end quarterback talent that you want to see. Now, Oregon didn't necessarily make use of that. They play a very, very conservative offense, throwing the ball short a lot, playing it safe, and that probably factors in a little bit in terms of how well he protected the ball and didn't put it in harm's way and let other teams, put them in position to intercept him. But a lot of those same criticisms were there about Justin Herbert. We heard the same thing about Justin Herbert ahead of time, saying, oh, well, I don't feel like he's that good of a prospect. And lo and behold, he gets into the NFL and he takes it by storm. We're talking about him being one of the top 5-6 quarterbacks in the league. I mean, if you're down on him, you still probably say he's top 10. So I think Nix has suffered from some of the same kind of criticisms. I don't think he's as good as Herbert is, but I do think that this Oregon offense and just the way that they want to play the game has had a negative effect on the quarterbacks and at least their perception of it. Now, if Nix comes out and is a day one hit and hits the ground running, will we start to see maybe some evaluators change their opinion on Oregon quarterbacks? Does that shift the way we talk about them? Maybe. But more, at least for right now, I think Bo Nix is in a position where some of the slander against him might drive him down on the board, but if he's available for someone like the Broncos at 12 or the Vikings at 11 or the Raiders at 13, I think this is one of the most ready quarterbacks that you can drop into a bad situation, and he can maximize that. So teams like the Broncos that probably need some help at wide receiver, and teams like the Raiders that need some help pretty much everywhere in the offense, I think this is the kind of candidate that you want to target and you hope that kind of guy falls to. I think even if the Patriots at 3, if the Patriots saw it the way that I see it and they said, we want a guy that's going to have a very high floor and could develop into a franchise high-level quarterback, I think that's why they need to go for Nix at 3 over some of these other candidates, because not only is the floor higher, but he does everything that you want to see. It's just Oregon didn't ask him to do it. So maybe there's a little bit of a learning curve as he steps into a pro-style offense and has to make some more difficult throws down the field. But he's made those throws. We've seen it. Maybe not as much as some of the other guys, but we have seen him make those throws, and it hasn't been a problem to this point. I think Bo Nix, for all of his upside, as well as the seemingly a surety that you're not going to get a total flop of a player, is why he is sitting at the 3 spot for me. Now at 4, kind of sitting in the same tier as Bo Nix, I see both Drake May and Caleb Williams as those blue chip elite prospects, the guys that you trade up, you ship the 3 first-round picks to move up to get, which I don't think anyone will be able to this time. But I see Jaden Daniels as the 4th quarterback in this draft, and I put him kind of in the same category as Bo Nix. If you took Jaden Daniels over Bo Nix, I wouldn't protest too much. And the reason why is I think he's more raw of a prospect. But I think when you look at his scrambling ability, if you want to play that type of ball, if you want to try to emulate a Lamar Jackson or a Kyler Murray level of scrambling offense, I think Daniels is a guy that could eventually turn into that player. I don't think he's there now. I think he has some bad habits of once things start to degrade, he looks only to run, like he just puts his head down, gets ready to take off and use his legs and use his athleticism, which is above, it's amazing. He's a great rushing threat, so it makes sense. But still, to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, you need to be looking down the field while you're doing that. You can't just be in run mode. You still need to be a quarterback that you can pull up out of that scramble and throw it if you're behind the line of scrimmage to absolutely punish a defense and go get like a 40-yard pass down the field because the play broke down. I think he's still missing part of that element to his game. And I think that he has played with two of the best receivers in college football. Obviously, Brian Thomas Jr. is likely to be a first-round pick. I'd be absolutely floored if Malik Nabers isn't even in the top 10, let alone in the first round. Leaning on those two guys, I think he has some accuracy issues that they help kind of smooth over a little bit. You know, his passes weren't perfect. I don't think Jayden Daniels is, you know, in the same category as a guy like Nix or May or Williams in terms of his location, but he's not bad at it either. He's not so far gone that you're like, man, this is a total project that we need to sit him on the bench and see what happens 2 years from now. I do think that Jayden Daniels in a bad team, if he goes to a team like the Giants right now that don't have a very good offense, that are rebuilding the offensive line, that are, you know, need to bring in multiple weapons before they're ready to compete with the best in the NFL, I think that's where he's going to suffer because he is a guy that takes a ton of hits. He's a guy that doesn't necessarily feel the pressure as well as some of the other quarterbacks do, and navigate the pocket. I think he still feels it well, but I don't think he's as adept at keeping the hits away from him, you know, throwing it away or sensing that the pressure is coming and finding a way to dump the ball off or get rid of it. I think he's a guy that at that point either takes the hit or, you know, takes off running and takes the hit, and he does not have the frame to do that in the NFL level. So I think there's going to be an element of coaching. I don't know that he's a true day one kind of guy, but the upside is so crazy high with the way he runs that if you land him on a good team and one that can develop him as a quarterback, you could be talking about a Lamar Jackson style elite quarterback that has, you know, elite handles, can juke guys out of their shoes, and can also throw the ball as well to really just be that dual threat quarterback that, you know, defenses have so much trouble stopping. I mean, there's a reason Lamar was the MVP last year. Now, my fifth rated quarterback is J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, a guy that I still would take in the first round, but I'd be much more comfortable taking him somewhere around 25, 26, 27, rather than going high in the draft and taking him top 5, top 10, or even, you know, if pick 12 came around and I'm the Broncos and J.J. McCarthy's there, I'm hesitant. I mean, the only way I would take him is if some of these other guys are off the board that we already talked about. And the reason for that is because we just didn't really get to see enough of him at Michigan. I think he's good just everything across the board, but I don't think he's special anywhere. I mean, I think he's a good athlete. I think he's got a good arm. I think he's, you know, his accuracy is fine. I just don't think that he does any one thing special. And when you're talking about that, he is a very, very young prospect still, so there's time to grow. It's not like Penix and it's not like Bo Nix that have been in college for forever and have been starting for forever. He's been a guy that, you know, probably because of the sanctions on Michigan, had to jump ship and was ready to come to the NFL. And from all the talk, it sounds like the NFL loves this guy and he's going to go really highly in the draft. I just think you need to pump the brakes. I think he's good at everything, but I think he's still probably a guy that I wish we could have seen more before we had to make this decision. So if there's a Jayden Daniels, if there's a Bo Nix, and I'm sitting in the teens, I'm taking him over J.J. McCarthy because McCarthy is a guy that I think you should park on the bench for a year. I think he needs to sit for a year and really learn and continue to develop rather than throwing him right out there on a bad team. Like, I don't want to see him go to the Raiders where the offensive line needs some work. And, yeah, you have Devontae Adams, but he's starting to get a little bit older. The rest of the offense probably needs a boost. I don't want to see him as a day one starter out there just kind of thrown to the wolves because that's, I think, how you get like a Zach Wilson kind of career where he's clearly not ready. The team isn't necessarily ready for him to even be out there, and we're just going to chuck him in and hope for the best. I think he still needs to develop more, and that's why I would say picking him somewhere around the 20s would be more in line with the value you want to see. Now, is that going to happen? No, because there's 3 teams at the top of the draft that are desperate for quarterbacks. There's 3 teams right at the early teens that are desperate for quarterbacks. The Giants might take one. I think the Seahawks should take one, or at least consider it. I think Miami should consider it so they don't have to pay Tua, but that's not for this video. When it comes to J.J. McCarthy, he's very likely going to go much higher than I would want to take him. And if it was me on draft day and you're sitting there and he's the only quarterback on the board and you're sitting at 11, 12, 13, I would pull the trigger and take him too. But if there's another option or if there's a situation where you could trade down and expect him to still be there, I think that is what teams should do rather than drafting him highly. At number 6, still a great quality quarterback, we have Michael Penix Jr. Coming out of Washington. I would love to see him kind of in that same range as McCarthy. And in terms of tiers, I think the two are pretty close to each other. I know one I have as a first-round pick, one that I want to get late, and I have Penix as a second-round pick. Really, it's just the injury history. I mean, that kind of talk has died down here as people start to look more into what he can do. But the fact of the matter is he's had 4 injuries that have ended his season through a 6-year career in college. So that's a lot. I mean, that is a major, major concern, and one that I think is hard to overlook in terms of spending a first-round pick on a guy. Now, he had some great performances. He also had great receivers, 2 guys that are likely to be highly drafted in this year's draft. But compared to someone like Jayden Daniels, he doesn't have the physical gifts. He doesn't have the arm that some of the other guys in this draft has. He's somewhere probably in the middle in terms of where a prospect would be, where it's not weak, it's not bad, it's not a weakness, but it's also nothing that you're writing home to and saying, oh, you know, this is going to be special. He's going to be throwing 65-yard bombs on the run, and we're going to have such a great deep game. I also don't think he works the middle of the field very well. Like, he's not really a rhythm passer that kind of like throws guys in stride. I think for the most part, Washington did a lot of work down the field where he kind of chucked it up to those great receivers that would go up and go pluck the ball away from some DBs. I think Penix can play right away. I think he has a decent floor to him where if you were the Raiders and he's got to start today because you don't want to start Aiden O'Connell, and I know they have Gardner Minshew, but I just don't know that that's the case. That's if you drafted Penix and you wanted him to start right away over someone like Minshew, I think he could do it. The problem is with all this training that he's had and all this experience that he's gotten in college, is he a guy that you can afford to not play right away? Is he a guy that you can afford to sit him for a couple years or even 1 year and have him come off of that, off the bench in year 2 and see what happens? I don't really see it. I think he's a guy that's in just this really weird spot of he's not untalented, but because of his age, are you going to get to that second contract? Is he going to be good enough to be worth the second contract? And when you're talking about gambles like that at quarterback, that is where you want to spend a second-round pick on a guy. You know, any other position you'd be saying, oh, that's a little bit later round pick because we're not sure and he's really more of a gamble. Quarterback, you love your gambles because when they hit, it pays for itself 10 times over. So I would love to have him in the second round. If I was picking at 28, should the 49ers consider him? If you don't like Brock Purdy, I would say the answer is yes. And me personally, I'm not a big Brock Purdy guy. I don't think he's that particularly good of a quarterback. I think he's everything we've seen from San Fran. Between your C.J. Beathards and Nick Mullins and all the rest of it, I think it's the same thing, where the rest of the team has lifted him up. Should they consider someone like Penix at the end of the first round? I'd be okay with it. I think it'd be okay. And that would give you options of if he's not ready, yeah, you could go park him and wait another year and see what happens. Stay cheap when that contract comes up with Purdy. Otherwise, I would want to wait for him to come around to the back end. I don't know that I'd want to spend pick number 16 if I'm the Seahawks to go out and get him because he's just such a mystery. You don't know that he's going to be healthy. You don't know that he's going to be good enough. You don't know that he's going to be a guy that is going to be a 10-year starter for you just because of the age and the injury history. So a lot of question marks, and when you have that, you still see the shine, you still see the potential. That was a lot of negative, but I do like his game. I think there are things that he brings to the table. I think when it comes to Penix, there's too many question marks and too many boxes that still need checked, even with all the experience that we've seen, that you just can't spend a high pick on him. I think that is why he sits behind just about everybody else that people consider to be the top-level quarterbacks, and I consider to be the top-level quarterbacks in this draft. Now, at number 7, we are at a spot where I think you have finally run out of guys that you truly want to be day one starters. I think Penix is right on the borderline of when, should you, shouldn't you, in terms of starting him. I don't think that debate really exists for Spencer Rattler. He's been around in college football. We've seen him have some success. Like, he goes through these flashes where he's amazing between South Carolina and Oklahoma, and then he goes through other flashes where he's not very good at all. So he's definitely a developmental quarterback, but when you look at the size, the speed, the arm strength, the ability to make good decisions at times, I think picking a guy like Rattler is different from everybody else that's going to come up on this list because he has some of the tools to be a franchise quarterback. If you develop him, he could turn into I don't know that I would say star, but I think he could be a very effective and very useful quarterback. I also don't want to call him like a game manager. We're not saying that he's going to be terrible. Do I think he'll ever be Patrick Mahomes? No. But do I think he could wind up being a serviceable starter in the NFL for you where a good team could win a Super Bowl with him? I think he's got that in his range. I think that's the kind of player he could be. Now, there's some bust potential. There's, I think, a pretty good reason why we saw him have to transfer to South Carolina from Oklahoma, because there are some holes to his game. There are some issues with his consistency, and sometimes that doesn't go away. And in terms of everybody else, I still think because of the shine, because of the upside, you see such a high ceiling with this guy that you should still consider spending a second-round pick on him, especially if you're at the back end of it. Would you go any higher? I don't know. I mean, realistically, how much faith do you have in him? Because I do think he's a sit-and-wait kind of candidate. I don't think he starts right away. But if you have a team that is not sure at quarterback and you want to hedge your bets by taking a guy that could develop, I think you really only have this one chance to take a guy that has franchise quarterback level talent, and that is Rattler. I think everybody else that's going to come on this list is not a guy that you can really just sign off on as a GM and say, well, we'll just develop him and that's our plan. We can go with that going forward. It's a risk worth taking. I think everybody else is a little bit more of a shot in the dark than Rattler is. Now at number 8, we have a big jump down from a late second-round pick for Spencer Rattler all the way down to a fourth-rounder for Jordan Travis. The long and the short of it is he just doesn't have the arm strength it's going to take to be an NFL quarterback. And when you are in that kind of situation, he has athleticism. He's going to be able to come in and play, I think, a very effective backup, maybe even a fringe starter level kind of player. I just don't see Jordan Travis with his arm strength ever truly developing into a top-tier quarterback. Like, he's never going to be top 12, and he's never going to be top 15. So when you're talking about a guy like that, we're drafting a backup quarterback. Maybe he winds up in an area like Gardner Minshew does, where if your team strikes out at quarterback, you're going to be able to, have a Jordan Travis that you can sign and play him for a little while, but you're always probably going to be looking for that next guy. So even though he has a ton of moxie, even though I think he is a great leader and certainly had Florida State playing out of their minds this season, I don't think you can look at Jordan Travis and say he's a starting quarterback, at least not yet. He's a sit-and-wait kind of guy. Let's see what happens. Take him, let him learn, and then if you need him, especially if you get like one of those 4 to 6 week injuries with a starting quarterback, he could be one of the better guys in the NFL, which is why you should spend a pick here in the middle of the draft to bring him onto your team. The upside isn't there, but the floor might be higher with a guy like Travis than we're talking about, for most quarterbacks in most years. Now, in the same category at number 9 is Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I see him also as a fourth-round pick, and this is really more of a pick-your-poison kind of guy. I do see him as more of a touch passer than a guy that's really going to be shooting the ball down the field. I think you're giving up some athleticism for that you could have in Jordan Travis for more of a traditional passer. Now, that's not to say that Pratt can't run, he can't take off, he can't make things happen. I just don't see him necessarily as the athlete that Travis is, and I think it's really more of a choose what type of backup quarterback you have. If you have Brock Purdy in San Fran and you want to bring in a guy that fits that play style, I would take a Michael Pratt. Now, if you want more of an athletic quarterback for someone like Jalen Hurts, then you look more for a Jordan Travis just to fit with what you already do as a team. So Pratt and Travis, to me, very, very similar in terms of where they should be taken. If they were taken anywhere in the mid-round of the fourth round, I would be okay with it. If teams even reached up into the third, I wouldn't call it too bad. But any other year, you might be talking about these guys being third-round picks, but because there's so much depth here, there's so much talent, I think that's going to push them down the board a little bit. I don't think there's going to be teams rushing out to go get them because, if you're here and there's 8 quarterbacks off the board, do you think the 9th team drafting a quarterback is going to have to hurry up to go take him? Probably not. So it will be a really interesting story on day 3, most likely, to see where guys like Jordan Travis and Michael Pratt land. And I want to see how much urgency teams have to go after guys that I see as more of a high-end backup potential, maybe even fringe starter potential, rather than guys that have true franchise talent, like Spencer Rattler, Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, and everybody else who's been before them on this list. Now, really getting down into the weeds at number 10, we have Austin Reed out of Western Kentucky. I see him as a late 6th-round pick. I mean, for a small school product, I think he's a great player, and he's done a very, very good job with his intermediate passing, with his ability to lead targets, and just his overall vision. I think from a rhythm passing perspective, he can be an effective guy. He misses some touch, and it's strange to say. It's not usually something that you see out of a guy that is more of a rhythm passer. Usually those guys have touch for days. They just don't have the arm and the athleticism to be top-tier talents. There were times where Austin Reed would just spike the ball at a guy, and it really didn't make any sense in terms of what you usually see for that prototype. But it is a weakness to his game and something that he has to learn, and some guys never really get over that. You can't be throwing bullets at guys catching screen passes and catching short passes over the middle because you're just going to force more incompletions. I think he needs to work on his touch to really be a high-end backup, but I think that's definitely in his range of outcomes. I think Austin Reed could be one of those guys that maybe fits like a Bailey Zappi type role where if you have a bad starter, you might be more interested in playing him than the starter, where he comes in and you steal some games. I don't see him as a high-end backup because if he had to play 8 games, I don't know that he's going to be the guy that can turn into 5 wins. I don't know he's the guy that can turn into 4 wins. I think he's more of a guy that maybe he steals 1 or 2 because he's hot, and then maybe you come crashing back down to earth. Now, that being said, there's still some value there because a lot of backup quarterbacks, they come into the game and you're just like, we're losing this week. And maybe the defense, maybe the running game can save us and we win despite our quarterback. I think he has more talent than that. I just don't think that Austin Reed is a guy that is going to elevate enough to warrant more than a late 6th round pick. Now, my last quarterback on the board is Joe Milton from Tennessee. And I wanted to leave him off because I watched a lot of Tennessee football, both during the season. I went back and watched Joe Milton trying to think, was it as bad as I remember? The answer is yes. Yeah, Joe Milton is not a good quarterback right now. And I know some people are going to be a lot higher on him than I am. I think when you talk about him versus Hendon Hooker, Tennessee saw a massive kind of step back in terms of their passing game, not just because they lost a couple of receivers, but more because of the quarterback play. And I think Joe Milton is just incredibly raw. It's strange to say about a guy that spent that much time in college, but he just is not where you need to be from a accuracy and decision-making standpoint to really spend any kind of pick on him. Now, he's a big guy. He has that prototypical size that some teams love at quarterback, and he has a big arm too. So there might be a team that goes crazy on him, and he's a 4th-round pick, and we're all scratching our heads saying, how did that happen? But realistically, I think the best thing you do if you're going to take a guy like Milton is you park him on your practice squad or you sit him as like your 3rd quarterback, and it's just about learning. It's just about trying to develop him over the course of the next couple seasons, and maybe he's a guy that you can get a quiet, like Jordan Love kind of arc out of, where maybe it takes him 2 or 3 years before he ever sees the field, but you have a great quarterback coach. You're able to develop him and turn him into a starting caliber guy because of coaching rather than where he's at today. So I wouldn't want my team to spend a pick on him. I think this is kind of a luxury pick that if your team is looking to develop a guy, like maybe Miami thinks that they're going to pay Tua, but they don't want to pay him long-term or something along those lines, you take a Joe Milton and you just kind of wait and see. But I don't think there's any other label you want to throw on him other than project. And you should still take a project quarterback with the draft pick, but Joe Milton is a massive fixer-upper project. And I think some people kind of get hypnotized by the arm strength. They get hypnotized by a couple of the highlight plays, throwing the ball over the top. And they miss out on so many missed opportunities that he's had and the lowlights that have come from his play at Tennessee that, the rose-colored glasses might drive him up the board, but realistically, he is a guy that maybe you take a snipe on late in the draft and you just wait and see if your quarterback coach can spend enough time with him to turn him into anything. That's going to do it for my list of guys that I see as draft picks in the 2024 draft at quarterback. Let me know in the comments, which guys do you like, which ones did I have out of order, and which guys don't deserve draft picks at all. I'd love to hear all about it, so make sure you leave me your opinion on it, and I'll make sure I get to it. I think this is an incredibly deep draft. I'm excited for it. I think this is probably the best one we've seen in terms of depth all the way through since the Trevor Lawrence draft, and I actually think is better than that because the top 6 guys I think are very close to first-round picks. I know I gave Michael Penix a second-round grade, but if he's 31 or 30 or 29 or 28 or someone trades with the Chiefs, I was going to say 32, but you got Mahomes, you're not drafting him. If someone trades to 32 and takes him there, I'm not going to be that upset about it. I think this is an incredibly deep draft where you never know which one of these guys are going to hit and which ones are going to miss. Invariably, we're going to have some guys that have all this potential coming out of college, never live up to it. I think 1 through 6 are incredibly talented, and I think even 7 through 11, there's more talent than we usually see at the quarterback position. It's going to be an exciting one. I can't wait to talk with you guys about where these guys actually go here after Thursday, Friday, Saturday, when we see all these guys come off the board. So for Sports Around the Bar, I'm Jake. Thanks for hanging with me, and we will see you next time. Cheers.